Laura wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished cleaning the last hotel room of the day. The sun was setting outside the window, casting a soft orange light on the floor. She looked at her hands, dry and tired from scrubbing floors and changing sheets. Her thoughts drifted to Emma, her 8-year-old daughter, waiting for her at home. Emma loved drawing and dreamed of becoming an artist someday. But art supplies were expensive, and Laura's salary barely covered rent and food. She sighed, thinking of the promises she had made to Emma: better clothes, a birthday cake, maybe even a new set of crayons. All of it felt so far away. As Laura picked up a coat left on the chair, she felt something in the pocket. Curious, she reached in and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a lottery ticket. She turned it over, looking at the date. It was from last week. Her heart skipped a beat. Had this ticket been checked yet? She stood still, holding the ticket tightly. What if this is the answer, she whispered to herself. But then a wave of guilt washed over her. This wasn't hers. It belonged to the guest who had stayed in this room. Laura slipped the ticket back into the coat pocket, but the thought stayed with her. What if this little piece of paper could change everything? Emma's smile came to her mind. It's just a dream, she said softly, but the idea wouldn't leave her. With a deep breath, she finished her work and turned off the lights in the room. But as she walked down the hallway, her mind stayed on the lottery ticket, and a quiet question echoed in her heart: what should I do? Laura couldn't stop thinking about the ticket. That night, after putting Emma to bed, she sat at the small kitchen table. The ticket was in front of her now, lying next to her cup of tea. Her hands trembled as she picked it up again. What if it's a winning ticket, she thought. Images filled her mind: paying off bills, buying Emma the art supplies she always wanted, and maybe even moving to a better apartment. The possibilities seemed endless. But then she remembered the guest. He was a tall man with a loud voice. He had shouted at her earlier that day because the towels in his room weren't folded the way he liked. He didn't even say thank you when she brought him new ones. Her stomach turned as she thought of his face. Did someone like him deserve a fortune like this? She looked at Emma's drawings on the fridge. Bright colors, happy faces, and little hearts filled the paper. What would Emma think of me if she knew? Laura whispered. She shook her head and put the ticket back down. The next morning, the man returned to the hotel, angry and impatient. I lost something important, he barked at the receptionist. Laura froze as she overheard his voice. She glanced at the coat she had taken home to wash. The ticket was still inside. Her heart raced. Should she say something? The man's harsh words echoed in her head, but so did Emma's laugh. Laura took a deep breath and walked toward him, her hands shaking. Sir, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I think I found what you're looking for. The man turned to Laura, his expression sharp and impatient. You found it? What do you mean? He asked. His voice was loud, making Laura feel small, but she stood her ground. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the ticket. This was in the coat you left in your room, she said, holding it out to him. For a moment, he just stared at it, then snatched it from her hand. He looked at the numbers carefully. His eyes widened, and he let out a short laugh. This is it. This is the winning ticket, he exclaimed. Laura felt her stomach drop as she watched his excitement. The man didn't thank her right away. Instead, he walked to the front desk, talking loudly about his luck. Laura stood in the hallway, her heart heavy. She thought about Emma, about the rent, about how that money could have changed everything. Just as she turned to leave, the man called out to her. "Wait," he said, his tone softer now. He walked back to her, still holding the ticket. "You could have kept this," he said, looking her in the eye. "But you didn't." "Why?" Laura hesitated. "Because it wasn't mine," she said simply. The man was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded and said, "That kind of honesty is rare." He pulled out his wallet and handed her a card. "Meet me tomorrow at my office. I have something for you." Laura looked at the card, her heart pounding. She didn't know what he meant, but for the first time in years, she felt something new, a tiny spark of hope. The next morning, Laura stood outside the address printed on the card. It was a tall, glass building that seemed to shine under the morning sun. She held Emma's hand tightly, her heart racing with nervousness. "Be brave," she whispered to herself. Inside, the receptionist greeted them and led them to an office on the top floor. The man from the hotel, now dressed in a sharp suit, sat behind a large desk. He smiled when he saw them. "Come in," he said, his voice calmer than before. Laura stepped forward, unsure of what to expect. Emma stayed close, looking around the fancy room with wide eyes. "I wanted to thank you," the man said. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did." He opened a folder on his desk and pushed a piece of paper toward her. Laura picked it up and read it slowly. Her eyes widened. It was a check. A very large check. This is too much," she said, her voice shaking. The man shook his head. "It's not. You've earned it. Use it for whatever you need, for your daughter, your future." Tears filled Laura's eyes as she looked at Emma, who smiled brightly. For the first time, Laura saw a new path ahead of them, a life where they wouldn't have to struggle anymore. The man stood and shook her hand. "You reminded me that honesty and kindness still matter," he said. "Good luck, Laura." As Laura and Emma left the office, they held hands, their steps lighter than ever. Emma looked up at her mother and said, "Mom, can we get new crayons now?" Laura laughed, her heart full of gratitude and hope. "Yes, sweetheart. We can get all the crayons you want." Laura sat at the small table in their new apartment, watching Emma draw with her brand new set of crayons. The room was brighter, filled with the warmth of hope and new beginnings. Emma held up her picture proudly. "Look, Mom. It's us in our bakery." Laura smiled and nodded. "It's perfect," she said, her heart full. The bakery was still small, but it was hers, a dream she never thought could come true. She worked there every day, baking fresh bread and cakes, and Emma often helped after school. As she looked at her daughter, Laura thought about the journey they had taken. "Emma," she said, "do you know why I gave the ticket back?" Emma tilted her head. "Because it was the right thing to do?" Laura nodded. Yes. Sometimes doing the right thing is hard, but it always brings something good in the end. She turned to the camera sitting on the counter, where she had started recording little messages for people who visited the bakery. Now it's your turn, Laura said to her viewers. What would you have done with the ticket? Tell me in the comments. And remember, honesty and kindness can open doors you never imagined. Laura ended the recording with a warm smile, feeling proud of how far she and Emma had come. As she closed the bakery for the day, she whispered to herself, sometimes dreams come true in ways you don't expect. Walking home with Emma, holding her hand, Laura looked up at the sky. The struggles were behind them, and the future was bright. It was a life filled with love, honesty, and the promise of endless new beginnings.